जनाब मुकरम भाई साहब, आपने रजा हो तो शुरू करिए।
हाशिर अजीज भाई, रजा से शुरू करो।
शुक्र भाई साहब। आऊज़ु बिल्लाहि समील अलीम मिनश शैतानिर रजीम, बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। जनाब मुकरम भाई साहब, जनाब आमिर भाई साहब, बिरसा कसरे आलिन बेत ज़ैनीन साहिबो, उम्मुल किराम, members of SPMAA, Mumineen, Muminat, and Farzand of North America. Alikara Sayyidina Mufaddal Saifuddin Mola Tawla Shif Layumuddin nu dua and ehsan che कि आप मौला ये सैफी बुरहानी मेडिकल एसोसिएशन कायम फरमाएं। अने शुक्र है कि आप खिदमत में शामिल की। Before we begin, we would just like to remind attendees that this webinar is only for North American Mumineen. The information presented here is not intended to be medical or legal advice. On behalf of the officers of SPMAA, I humbly utter shukr to Janab Mukerram Bhai Sahab for his unwavering support and who has taken the time to join us during this webinar. We respectfully do others to Janab Bhai Sahab to initiate the proceedings by saying a few words to all Mumineen who are in attendance. Shukran sahab.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह व सलामुन अला इबादिही लज़ीना इस्तफ़ा। खुदा ताला कुरान मजीद में फरमावे छे कि यरफ़इल्लाहु लज़ीना आमनु मिनकुम वल्लज़ीना उतुल इल्मा दरजात। अदाइल अजल सैयदना मौलाना अली क़दर मुफद्दल सैफुद्दीन आका इमाम ज़माना नायबन हिजाब बल्कि इल्म लदुन्नी ना बाब कि जे मौला तवल्ला उम्र शरीफ ला यौमिद्दीन रजा मुबारक अने दुआ मुबारक ना तुफैल में इल्म तलब करना दरजात ने जिस्मन व नफ्सन जाहिरन व बातिनन बुलंद करे छे। तमाम उलूम अने फनून ने ये मौला तवल्ला उम्र शरीफ नी जात पे अकदसी जोड़ाયેલા છે। તે જ સબબ ये इल्म ना हासिल करना ने बुलंदी अने वसत मिले छे। ये उलूम ना दरिया में ला कीमत जवाहिर समाया हुआ छे। ये जवाहिर ने तलब करवाने इल्मनी कुने लग पहुंचवा जरूरी छे ताकि एनासी खासतन जान ने फायदो थाय अने आमतन इबादुल्लाह ने फायदो पहुंचावी शकाय। मौलाना मुफद्दल सैफुद्दीन आका फरमावे छे कि हर इल्मनो खुलासो इमाम हुसैन नो मातम अने बुका छे। तो वाजे थाय छे कि करबला में जे मुसीबतना मोजो आया એને યાદ કરીને આંસુ બહાવીને ઇલ્મનો ખુલાસો હાસિલ થાય છે। દુનિયાના આફતો અને વબાસી હિફાજત થાય છે અને હકીકતન ઇલ્મના કુને તરફ પહોંચાય છે। તો ઉલૂમની ઘણી અકસામ છે, એમાંથી એક કિસ્મ ઇલ્મ તિબ છે। તો અતિબ્બા ડોક્ટરોએ ઇલ્મમાં ગહેરાઈ કરીને રિસર્ચ કરીને इबादुल्लाह ना बेहतर फायदा वास्ते कोशिश करे छे। अमीर मुमिनीन ना इरशाद ने वाजे करता हुआ अपना दाई अल हयुल मुकद्दस सैयदना मोहम्मद बुरहानुद्दीन आका फरमावे छे कि अमीर मुमिनीन इरशाद फरमावे छे कि डॉक्टर ने खिताब करीने फरमावे छे जे शख्स तबीब बने तीन चीज फरमावे छे। तो पहले लाजिम छे कि खुदानी तकवा रखे। बीसरी चीज खैर ख्वाही करे। खैर ख्वाही करवी घनी जरूरी छे। अने तीसरी चीज इज्तिहाद करे, कोशिश करे, एफर्ट्स करे, मेहनत करे। तो मुमिनीन डॉक्टरों अने हेल्थ केयर प्रोफेशनल्स आ इरशाद बराबर लई उठे ते खातिर मौलाना अली क़दर मुफद्दल सैफुद्दीन आकाए तबीब रूहानी सैफी बुरहानी मेडिकल एसोसिएशन अमेरिका ने कायम फरमावी। ये एसोसिएशन नो एक अहम मकसद ये है कि मुमिनीन और मुमिनात हेल्थ केयर प्रोफेशनल्स ने एक प्लेटफॉर्म मिले जेनासी मुमिनीन नी खासतन अने इबादुल्लाह नी आमतन खिदमत करी सकाय। ये सिलसिला में SBMAA ये घना प्रोजेक्ट्स अने इनिशिएटिव्स अचीव कीधा छे। हजरत इमामिया में अने सादात किरामना क़ियादत में पहली ज वक्त आ संस्था नु इज्तिमा 1436 ऑरेंज काउंटी में थયું। मौलानी हजरत में अल अशरा मुबारकानी मजलिस अटेंड करवा वास्ते स्कॉलरशिप्स मुहैया कीधा जेनासी घना मुमिनीन ये फायदो लीधो अने इंशाअल्लाह हजी ये सगला फायदो लेसे। શિકાગોમાં બસ 2019 2019 જૂનમાં પહેલી જ વખત આ a professional educational conference with CME credit was offered to Mumineen healthcare professionals. The first of its kind SBMA Meds Conference, an initiative to supply Jamaats with AED defibrillators for emergency use was accomplished. International collaborative efforts by coordinating care with the Chennai Polyclinic by providing remote consultation with US specialists to assist in the care of COVID Mumineen patients. Collaboration with Burhani Medical Idara to produce a documentary lecture film on obesity. Publication of monthly medical newsletter. Sponsorship of medical career workshops and seminars. COVID-ni waba mutaliq special initiatives. Fezul Mawail Burhaniya ane masajid ane majalisni reopening waste comprehensive guidelines તૈયાર કીધા. તમામ જમાતોના ગુસુલ અને મૈયત કમિટી વાસ્તે guidelines and appropriate protective equipment ને મુહૈયા કીધા. આજે એ જ સિલસિલામાં COVID-19 અને એના વેક્સિનના બારામાં ઇન્ફોર્મેટિવ વેબિનાર તૈયાર કીધું છે, જેમાં આપના મુમિનીન અને બહારના ડોક્ટર માહિરીન એક્સપર્ટ્સ જિકરો કરશે. મૌલાના મુફદ્દલ સૈફુદ્દીન આકાએ ગયા સાલના મુનાજાત શરીફામાં ફરમાયું कि या रब्बना कशिफ वबा अंतमत मखाविफ अब हो रिहितामिया, कि ए हमारा रब तू वो वबा ने कश करजे कि जेना मोजन दरियाओना खौफनु तूफान आयु छे. वक़य्यद जरासीमा हरिन कमा यक़तदिल अदलो बिल हिकमत दाया, अने शरना जरासीम ने तारा अदलना मुक्तदा मुताबिक तारी हिकमत से कैद करी देजे. व अंजलत मा कुल्ल दाइन दवान वसाहिल बिहिल में हनल आनिया, अने तू ये हर बीमारी साथे एनी दवा उतारी छे, तो ये दवा से दरपेश आवनार मेहनतों ने सहल करजे. रसूलुल्लाह फरमायु छे के मा अंजलल्लाहु मिन दाइन इल्ला अंजला लहु दवान. तो आ COVID-19 ની વબા ખતમ થાય અને જે ઇલાજની કોશિશો થઈ રહ્યા છે, વેક્સિનની રિસર્ચમાં જ્યાદા મારિફત જાણકારી થાય, ઇલ્મમાં જ્યાદા થાય, તે ખાतिर SBMA આ વેબિનાર તૈયાર કીધું છે. ખુદા તાઆલા ઇમામ હુસૈનના દાઈના વસીલાથી આપના દાઈ કલેમાત જે હવે આપને સુનશું એના વસીલાથી આ વબાને જલ્દી દૂર કરે અને મુમિનીનને ખાસતન અને ઇબાદુલ્લાહને આમતન એના મુસીબતના મોજોથી હિફાજતમાં રાખે. ખુદા તાઆલા સૈયદના અલી કદર મુફદ્દલ સૈફુદ્દીન આકાની ઉમ્ર શરીફને સેહત અને આફિયતના મલાબિસ ફાખિરા ઝાફિયામાં ઇલા યૌમિલ क़િયામah દરાજ અને દરાજ કરે. આમીન વલ્હમ્દુલિલ્લાહ રબ્બિલ આલમીન.
Shukran, Sad. We now would like to share a short bayan of Ali Qadar Mola speaking at the Aligarh Muslim University during the centenary celebrations on December 22nd. For those webinar attendees who are using an Apple device, you may need to press the play video icon on your device for the video to begin playback.
अल्लाह सुब्हानहू के बेशुमार नेमतों का शुक्र अदा करता हूँ और बारगाह इलाही करता हूँ कि अल्लाह ताला जल्द अज जल्द इस आलमगीर वबा कोविड की बला से बेहक इमाम हुसैन सलवातुल्लाह अलैह तमाम इंसानों को आजाद करे, रिज्क में कुशादगी अता करे. डॉक्टर्स, हेल्थ केयर वर्कर्स और मुख्तलिफ तबके के लोगों जिन्होंने इस मुश्किल हालात में इबादुल्लाह की मदद की है, अल्लाह ताला उन सबको जज़ाए खैर अता फरमाए और जो लोग वैक्सीनेशन मुहैया करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं उन्हें कामयाब करे। इबादुल्लाह की मदद की है, अल्लाह ताला उन सबको जज़ाए खैर।
Sorry, everyone. It seems that the video got cut a little early, but inshallah, apne pacho available kari naksuk ne, so the full video bhi hai, but sagla ne mil se. Amin, Molanu Ehsan. Sorry, everyone. It seems that the video got cut a little early, but inshallah, apne pacho available kari naksuk ne. So, before we begin with our speakers, we'll continue the program. I'd like to say a few more words about the mission of SPMMA. As Janab Mukerram noted, in the past few years, we have conducted a national conference, coordinated local flu shot clinics, and funded vaccination drives in India, provided AED and PPE to Jamaats, and even provided scholarships to students to attend Asharawaz with Akamala. Our mission is to leverage the experience, skill, and potential of medical professionals in the Dawadi Bohra community to achieve three aims. First, to engage in Khidmat of Mumineen. Second, to encourage and support aspiring medical professionals. And third, to provide networking and resources to practicing medical professionals. We would like to invite any Mumineen with in North America with a professional medical background, not just physicians, any kind of medical background, to join us. So if you're interested, please reach out to us after the webinar. We need you. That said, let's begin with our featured guests. I'd like to point out that in your browser window, there is a way for you to type in questions to submit to the speaker during their presentations. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session after the speakers have concluded. We also recommend using your phone in landscape orientation so you can see the speaker and their slides together at once. Our first speaker is Dr. Sheikh Idrees Mogri. Dr. Mogri received his MBBS from Sindh Medical University in Karachi and did his residency and fellowship at West Virginia University. Currently, he is an assistant professor at Texas A&M School of Medicine and pulmonary clinical faculty at Baylor Scott & White. He is also medical director in the Department of Respiratory Therapy at Baylor University Medical Center, where he is on the front line of the epidemic. At Baylor, they have treated, in the last year, 1,100 COVID patients. 20% of them were admitted in the ICU. In addition to his medical career, Sheikh Idrees is also a dedicated Khidmat Guzar. He has served in the medical camp at Ashura every year, is an active member of SPMAA, Burhani Medical International, Idara, and a member of the Madrasa Committee and lead of the Corona Watch Group under Umur Sehat in the Dallas Jamaat. Dr. Mogri will be discussing the topic, how does COVID infection happen? Sheikh Idrees, please.
Auzubillahi samir alim min ash-shaytan ar-rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Parwardigar kamala fadl maulani umar tar sharif ne da roze qiyamat sehat ne afiyat ma daraz karjo. Muazzaz Mumineen Muminat, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. આજનો આપનો ટોપિક પ્રાઇમરીલી વેક્સિન ના ઉપર છે તે કબલ મારી પ્રેઝન્ટેશન COVID-19 ને એક ઇન્ટ્રોડક્શન તરીકેથી એક્સપ્લેન કરવાની રહેશે જેમાં સગલા જાણે છે કે કેમ આ વબા ફેરી છે કેમ આના સિમ્ટમ્સ થાય છે લેकिन એક રિફ્રેશર એક રીકેપ કરીએ તાકે આગળ જાતા જ્યારે વેક્સિનની વાત થાય ત્યારે એની અહેમિયત વધારે સમજ પડે કે શું કામ એટલું ઇમ્પોર્ટન્ટ છે કે આપણે વેક્સિનેશન લઈએ. So let's talk about COVID and try to understand how serious disease this is. Starting off in a mode of transmission, सगला जानता है कि respiratory droplets से फैलाई है. So इनो શું मतलब કે જ્યારે भी કોઈ શખ્સ જેને ઇન્ફેક્શન છે વાત કરે છે ખાંસે છે છીંક આવે या હસે या એવા કોઈ भी અમલ થાય જેના સબબ મોંમાંથી પાણી નીકળે તો એને એ પાણીના અંદર ઇન્ફેક્શન છે એ રેસ્પિરેટરી ડ્રોપલેટ કહેવાય ને એના અંદર વાયરસ મોજૂદ છે. 6 ફીટનો ડિસ્ટન્સની જે સોશિયલ ડિસ્ટન્સિંગની વાત થાય છે તો એના વાસ્તે થાય છે કે આ રેસ્પિરેટરી ડ્રોપલેટ એટલું ટ્રાવેલ કરી શકે અગર કોઈ માસ્ક ના પહેર્યું હોય ને એના સાઇઝના મુતાબિક હજી બી જઈ શકે લેकिन ફોર ધ મોસ્ટ પાર્ટ એ 6 ફીટનો ડિસ્ટન્સ તક ટ્રાવેલ કરે છે ને પછી ગ્રેવિટીના સબબ નીચે પડી જાય. તો તેના વાસ્તે એટલું આપણે એનું અહેમિયત છે કે સોશિયલ ડિસ્ટન્સિંગ ને 6 ફીટનો ડિસ્ટન્સ શું કામ બીકોઝ આ રેસ્પિરેટરી ડ્રોપલેટ્સની ટ્રાવેલિંગ એટલી તક થઈ શકે. Once somebody comes in contact with infected person, એ જે રેસ્પિરેટરી ડ્રોપલેટને ઇન્હેલ કીધા તો એનો એ તમારા નાકના ને ગલાના જે મેમ્બ્રેન છે મ્યુકસ મેમ્બ્રેન તેના અંદર જઈને that is his site of infection and वहां पर डिपॉजिट થઈ ને પછી વાંસી એ વાયરસ રેપ્લિકેશન શરૂ કરે ને પછી વાંસી ઇન્ફેક્શન સ્ટાર્ટ થાય છે. હવે જ્યારે ઇન્ફેક્શન કોના વાસ્તે આ વધારે પ્રોબ્લેમ છે કોણ હાઈ રિસ્ક પોપ્યુલેશન કહેવાય તો સગલા જાણતા હશે કે આપણે એટલા લાસ્ટ યરના અંદર ઘણી એમ્ફેસિસ આપીએ છીએ કે જે બી બુઝુર્ગો છે મુમિનીનમાં those are extremely and exceptionally vulnerable to this infection. अपने जे अखा लिटरेचर आयु है कोविड ना ऊपर over the last year, it has shown that for those who are over the age of 65, approximately 8 out of 10 of these age population have died as a result of contracting the COVID-19 infection. In addition to that, diabetes and obesity, body mass index 30 na upar kehvai, those have been specifically affected and these are the most vulnerable population. In ICU na andar hame jo patients જોઈએ છે again 9 out of 10 times either they are diabetic, they are older age over the age of 65 or they are obese. Similarly, other at-risk population is those who have cancer, who are immunocompromised, who are taking medications for immunocompromised states. Those patients who have transplants and are immunocompromised, those who are on chemotherapy and are immunocompromised, those who have conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and are on biologics and other medications that reduce your immunity in order to fight that particular disease. So all those patients are considered to be high risk. And pregnancy in itself is a immunocompromised state for women, and that is considered to be in the same high-risk population. So exposure na baad, it may take up to 14 days, but it is for the most part within 2 to 5 days the infection na symptoms start thai once you have been exposed, and we'll talk about what is considered to be close contact exposure. The following symptoms generally speaking are seen in individuals, but I have highlighted the ones that are mostly seen. So fever occurs up to about 90 to 95% of the time. Ena sathe khasi, shortness of breath, fatigue is a big one. And a particular symptom that is unique to COVID-19 is the loss of taste and smell. Now, આનાથી શું જાહેર થાય છે? આપણે આ જોઈએ આ સિમ્ટમ્સના અંદર તો એક આઈડિયા એમ હોય છે કે આ તો અપર રેસ્પિરેટરી ઇન્ફેક્શન છે, લેકિન આનાથી એમ જાહેર થાય છે કે this actually affects મલ્ટી સિસ્ટમ્સને એફેક્ટ કરે છે, બોડીના ડિફરન્ટ સિસ્ટમ્સમાં. સો ન્યુરોલોજિકલ ઇન્વોલ્વમેન્ટ કહેવાય. અગર ટેસ્ટ ને સ્મેલ તમે લૂઝ કરો છો તો that has affected your nerves that are involved with taste and smell. ઘણાને કાર્ડિયક ઇશ્યુઝ ડેવલપ થાય છે. So the goal of this the take home point basically is that this is a multi-system disease and can affect a few different systems and is not only limited to the upper respiratory or lower respiratory system. હવે આ symptoms શરૂ થાય ને હવે જે high risk population છે એના અંદર these are the initial symptoms for everybody, but for those high risk population and for others as well, when should we consider getting emergency medical care? And that is for the most part, anytime somebody develops shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, chest pain, altered mental status or confusion, in a chehra par, in a lips par, in fingers na andar ek bluish tinge dekhai, which is a sign of lack of oxygen. Now ave to itli awareness avi gayi che ke people have started investing in buying pulse oximeters for home, and that if your oxygen saturation is below 90, that is considered to be a warning sign that now it has affected your lungs and is causing hypoxia. So these are the symptoms for which you should immediately get urgent care or go to the nearest emergency department. A બે વર્ડ ઘણા યુઝ થાય છે, ક્વોરન્ટાઇન ને આઇસોલેશન. એનો શું એક્ઝેક્ટલી મિનિંગ કહેવાય? તો હવે it is mostly interchangeable, but just to put it out there as far as definition is concerned, quarantine is to keep someone who might have been exposed to the virus away from others, whereas isolation is to keep someone who is infected by the virus away from others, even in their own home. So distinguish, why is this important to distinguish? Because one, for the most part, you have to isolate or quarantine anytime you are getting exposed to anybody. But once you have contracted the disease, it is imperative that that person is very strictly isolated, because this virus is extremely contagious. And even in the same house, it is necessary that that one person should not even come out of their own home, not use the same utensils, not use the same stuff otherwise that you use among family members. Because one cannot emphasize enough how contagious this infection is. So હવે આપણે વાત કરીએ કે who are those people who needs to quarantine? તો એના અંદર we have to understand the definition of what is considered to be a close contact. So a close contact is anybody who comes in contact with a person who is infected within 6 feet for at least a total of 15 minutes or more. ના એનો મતલબ એમ નથી કે આપણે 15 મિનિટ અગર એના સાથે નથી ગુજારા તો આપણે ઇન્ફેક્શન નહીં થઈ શકતી, because it depends upon what was happening within those 15 minutes. અગર એ સામે વાળા ખાંસી રહ્યા હતા અને સ્નીઝ કરી રહ્યા હતા યા જોર से હસી રહ્યા હતા, so then that even it doesn't take up to 15 minutes to get that infection. We are talking 15 minutes ની તો એમ લિમિટ એમ રાખી છે કે નોર્મલ કોન્વર્ઝેશનમાં યા તમે 6 ફીટના ડિસ્ટન્સથી કમ થયા, but it is extremely important that you maintain that 6 feet distance. કોઈ પોતાના ઘરમાં, as I said, isolate કીધા છે, હા તો ચલો કઈ નહીં, મેનો થોડું ખ્યાલ રાખું, લેકિન ના, એના સાથે જરા બી કોન્ટેક્ટ રહેશે યા repeated contact રહેશે, you are at a high risk for infection. Sharing eating or drinking utensils, all these are considered to be definition of a close contact, and for which you may have to quarantine yourself if you get to know that that person that you came in contact has now been infected. So according to CDC, what is the duration of quarantine? So એમાં ton કિસમની durations છે. So if you have symptoms and you test positive for COVID, you have to be quarantined for 10 days from the time your symptoms first appeared, and if you are fever free for 24 hours without having taken any fever reducing medications. Now in under symptoms under what are we talking about? We're talking about fever, of course, but we are talking about cough, and we're talking about fatigue and all those kind of symptoms. Anandar Khali, the only one that CDC says is not considered to be a symptom to take into consideration for those 10 days is loss of taste and smell, because evo symptom che jene it may take up to weeks or months to recover from it, and that does not factor into the duration of quarantine. So once again, jene symptoms thaya ne COVID positive che 10 divas from the time they first had the symptoms and up to 24 hours after having no fever. Now second group of people are those who never had any symptoms, and ye logo exposed thaya ne out of abundance of caution they went and tested themselves, and they found out that they are COVID positive. Now ye logo vaste bhi 10 divas from the time that they were tested positive for COVID, या પછી એ લોકોના symptoms ના ઉપર અગર symptoms develop થયા પછી તો then the symptoms take over, then 10 days from the symptoms onwards. The third group of people are those that have severe disease, who are hospitalized or are immunocompromised or have a high risk population. For them, the best course of action is to get their recommendations from the physician as to how to and when to break quarantine. Now this slide is, I apologize, this slide is supposed to say long COVID. Now, most of us don't know this phenomenon of long COVID. It is increasingly being recognized that patients who develop COVID infection, some patients who develop COVID tend to develop symptoms that linger on for weeks and months. And these symptoms include fatigue, shortness of breath, chronic cough, joint pain, difficulty with thinking and concentration. अपने कहते हैं कि हमारा attention नहीं अपातु, concentration नहीं थातु, भूली जाऊं छू, depression, muscle pain, and headaches. Now, we don't know as of right now why this is happening in certain people, but it is very debilitating in certain cases. So, koi cure bhi nathi, na hi koi treatment hai. So this is this additional concern of some of the patients developing long COVID is another reason why vaccination is so important, because there is just no way of knowing who are these people who are going to get into this kind of symptomatology. And it is actually very debilitating. Most people have stopped working and not been able to resume their previous lives. Duration of immunity. તો આપને બધાનો સવાલ એમ હોય છે કે ઓકે ચલો મને કોવિડ થઈ ગયું, હવે મારી જાન છૂટી, હવે મને કંઈ ફરક નહીં પડે. We cannot say that. Natural immunity after COVID infection, amna tak, and again this is unknown at this point, but tan mahina taknu જ amna tak literature na અંદર mention થાય છે કે reinfection tan mahina tak na થઈ શકે, like એના બાદ agar if you have lost your antibodies, you may get reinfected again. So this is not કે ઘણા જણા એમ કે છે અરે યાર કોવિડ થઈ જશે, ચલો પછી આપણે છૂટી જઈશું, હવે પછી આપણે નહીં થાય. No, that is not correct. You can get reinfected more or less 3 months after developing COVID. Similarly, acquired immunity, which other speakers will talk about, vaccinations, again, we don't know how long that protection lasts, but it definitely appears that it will last longer than natural infection. And one of the important reasons to get vaccinations, and again, that will be discussed later, is the fact that if most people and if enough amount of population gets vaccinated, then you get to a point which is called herd immunity, and that hopefully will end the pandemic. So in summary, vaccinations is extremely important. However, आज ये 10 basic principles जे अपने for the last year we have been practicing, and I understand that there's fatigue sets in as well, but it cannot be mentioned enough that proper mask wearing in public, social distancing for 6 feet, and frequent hand washing remains the cornerstone in the fight against COVID infection and prevention. And especially now there is literature to suggest that double mask wearing is considered to be 92% effective, especially in the environment where we are now seeing new variants that are emerging of COVID, which are more easily transmissible and more contagious. And lastly, when vaccination is available for your demographic, you should take it. So essentially, that is the introduction I wanted to give about COVID and how serious and what it is all about, so that when we talk about vaccinations, it emphasizes that point. So by that, मैं end करूँ छू ने परवदिगार मौलाना ना वसीला सी हर मोमिन ने वबा सी महफूज रखे, सेहत ने आफियत में रखे, ने आका मौला ने उमर शरीफ ने तारोज़ क़यामत सेहत ने आफियत में दराज करे. Ameen. Thank you.
Shukran, Sheikh Idrees bhai. We appreciate it. And we're going to please stay with us. We're going to have a question and answer session at the end, inshallah. Our next, I'll just go ahead and we'll introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Salma bin Saiger. Dr. Saiger attended medical school at Dow Medical College in Pakistan and did her residency in internal medicine at Overlook Hospital in New Jersey. She is currently in private practice in Mesquite, Texas, and is a principal investigator for SMS Clinical Research. She has participated in the Pfizer COVID vaccine trial and continuing with other phase 1, 2, and 3 trials in her research. Salma bin is also an experienced Khidmat Guzar in Dallas Jamaat, serving as secretary of Dairat al-Laqiq, organizer of the Young at Heart program for Buzurgo, and an active member of the SPMA. She's also working in the Corona Watch Group under Dallas Jamaat Umar Sehat. So Dr. Saiger will be discussing the topic, what do I do if I am infected or exposed? Salma bin.
Thank you, Aziz Bhai, for the introduction. Thank you, Idrees Bhai, for very good presentation on the COVID vaccine and the COVID infection. Abhi apne COVID-19 prevention par baat karsu. The cornerstone of COVID-19 prevention je apne ek baras se sunta javi rya chhe, but still haji thodu neglect kariye chhe apne day-to-day life ma. So again, same thing, washing your hands more than 20 seconds, हाथ नहीं मिलावानो, handshakes avoid करवानो, अपनी तबीयत में होई छे handshake करवानो, but that's something that needs to be avoided for the time being. Mask पहनू घणो जरूरी छे. N95 masks are considered the best mask for prevention, and as Idrees Bhai just mentioned, CDC just said 2 masks are better than 1. So based जो एक बरस से अपने basic सुनता आ रही है, अगर ये चीज़ों ने अगर अपने apply karsu, so I think that's number 1 for COVID-19 prevention. The second slide we'll talk about कि अगर तुमने expose थिया छो या अपने COVID ना symptoms थे या छे that Dr. Idrees Bhai talked about, तो पछी कौन सी testing करावानी ये घना questions होई छे मोमिनीन मा. जो number 1 testing जो होई छे ये rapid testing होई छे. Nasal swabs कराई छे 10 to 15 minutes में ना result आवी जाई छे. If it's positive, it's pretty accurate. If it's negative, it can still miss 15-17% of the positive cases. So we will recommend कि तमे पछी PCR testing करावी ने इन्हें confirm करो. PCR testing takes बेसी तन दिवस. At times results आवामा better accuracy होई छे इनी. And agar tame ekdam early on karai de, so after exposure without symptoms, it might be negative too. So you might want to repeat it after a couple of days agar apne symptoms agar develop thai raya che to. Antibody testing no bhi aap log sunta hai, so but it is better for checking immunity after an infection. It's not a very good test for checking ke tamare acute infection che ke nathi. Bekismna vaccine, Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are available in the United States. And Mumineen में घना सवाल हुई छे कि हमने कार्य मिल से So CDCA has developed in a categories banavela che, phases banavela che, ke who gets it first. So phase 1A ma healthcare personnel, I would say hospital workers, doctors, nurses, and a long-term care nursing home residents, I would say, which compromises almost 24 million in USA. Phase 1B ma frontline essential workers ave che, jema policemen, firemen, teachers, other essential workers, and 75 plus years na logo ave che, and this compromise almost 49 million people. Phase 1C ma ave che 65 to 75 years of age na people, jema 28 million logo che approximately. Ade 16 and above, jema koi medical problems che, a few that Dr. Idrees mentioned, like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, COPD, lung disease, or anything that can, your doctor thinks can affect you and compromises your immunity. And then finally, then people more than 16 years of age, in general, good population, in general health wise, they are good in health, they will be getting the vaccine eventually. Vaccine under 16, the trials are still going on for between 12 and 16 for both Moderna and Pfizer. And they have not been approved yet, so they are still in the works. COVID-19 vaccine bad, what to expect? Common side effects, je hame log ko trial ma joya and pachi getting the vaccine ourselves. Joya che first the most commonest is the injection site reaction. Ke jal injection lagu wa pain, swelling, redness thai. Kuch logon ne fever, chills, tiredness, headaches bhi thya. And short lasting hoy che 12-24 hours vaste last kare che usually. Haath ma darad hoy to become we advise them that to do icing, that really helps, or exercising the arm, moving the arm. Pani pivano, and agar fever and chills and develop thai, to taking some Advil or Tylenol as recommended by your physician. When to call the doctor? Agar tamari condition, tamar symptoms last longer, redness and pain gets worse, and you're concerned about having infection on that side. Second shot, je hoy che Moderna no it's going to be in 4 weeks. Pfizer no hoy che 3 weeks ma. Gana Mumineen na sawal MB che ke COVID-19 vaccine hamare levu che kahan par si laiye and everything. So of course, tamari county health department ma website par tame check karo, and lots of pharmacies will be soon offering it also. And website पर Google कर सो तो तमने खबर कर से कि कहाँ पर कौन सा doctors ना offices में भी available check in अथी. And lastly, I would recommend the V-Safe registry for people जिन्हें vaccine मिली चुकू छे. It is तमार online register करवानु छे, and it send you text reminders asking your तबीयत कि तमारे कोई side effects थई रहा छे कि नहीं, and they start collecting data for people also who are not in the trial, but from the general population. So we can learn more and more about these vaccines. And they also send you reminders about your second shot and everything like that too. So that is a nice registry that the CDC has started. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your time for listening. And akhir ma dua che kaka molani umar taroze qayamat daraz and daraz thai. And jalsiya baba khatam thai. Thank you, Aziz bhai.
Shukran Salma bhen. Mohammed bhai, do you want to introduce our next speaker?
So I think the next portion of the webinar will be some question and answers for Dr. Idrees bhai and Dr. Salma bhen. Shukran jazila for those very nice presentations. I'll start with, there's a lot of different questions coming in. So I'll just start with some and I will go from one speaker to the other. We'll start with Dr. Idrees bhai. There's a question, is there a risk of a severe allergic reaction if I receive the vaccine?
Thank you for that question. So, well, the answer is yes, but extremely rare that it might happen. So both these vaccines, Pfizer as well as Moderna, they have noted only a handful of people who developed allergic reactions. And when the question is about severe allergic reactions, none of them were severe enough to need to be hospitalized. They were given steroids, they were watched for a couple of hours or more, and they recovered. So the chances, so the answer is yes, it can happen theoretically, but it is extremely rare that is happening, and that should not prevent or discourage anybody from taking the vaccine.
As a follow-up to that, if I have severe asthma, is the vaccine okay to take?
In fact, you are the one who should take, because if you have bad asthma and you are one of the people who are at high risk, because if that were to happen and pneumonia were to settle in, then you will have two things to deal against. So yes, right now, even for asthmatics, it is highly recommended that you should take the vaccine.
Thank you. Dr. Salma Ben, is it safe for me to get the COVID vaccine if I'm pregnant or breastfeeding?
The CDC recommends that. Pregnancy is considered a high-risk condition, and the CDC does recommend that. Although in my experience with the Pfizer trial, the pregnant ladies were not included in those trials. Gana sawal mane personally aave che jamaat si ke pregnant che liye ke na liye. So honestly, I'm deferring it to their OBGYNs. And as a woman, I'm telling them to get Raza from Akamola.
Do you, Dr. Salma bin, there's a question on the ingredients in the COVID vaccine and regarding what are they?
Ingredients, there is a bunch of, molecules and shape, but there's no animal product. We have confirmed that with Pfizer and Moderna, and they are both considered halal. So we don't have to worry about the halal ingredients or the halal factor for the vaccines, for the two vaccines that are available right now.
Thank you. Dr. Idrees, there are some questions on the long COVID sufferers. One of the questions is there a COVID test, or does the current COVID test assess for long COVID sufferers? And how long should an asymptomatic person with a positive test be isolated?
Okay, so the answer to the first question is that there is no testing that can identify long COVID. The diagnosis of long COVID is essentially based on clinical symptoms and the appropriate history behind it. So if anybody who had a COVID infection in the recent past and now has lingering symptoms that are just not going away, which for the most part will include fatigue, shortness of breath, brain fog, that is considered to be long COVID. So it's a history of having a COVID infection in the recent past and lingering symptoms that do not go away after the usual 14 to 15 days of having the acute symptoms. That is what is considered to be long COVID. Now, the second part of the question is, how long do you have to quarantine after a positive test? So essentially, if you don't have any symptomatology whatsoever, then 10 days after your COVID test was positive, you can break quarantine and resume your activities. You do not necessarily need to have another COVID test done to confirm that you're negative. But if you do develop symptoms within those 10 days, initially you were asymptomatic, then develop symptoms, then your 10 days start from the time that your symptoms started. And then you can break your quarantine. And at that point as well, you don't necessarily need to have a negative COVID test to break isolation.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Salma bin, there's a question. Can you please tell us about contracting the virus through touching surfaces? How contagious can this be?
It can be contagious, and certain surfaces where it can live on for 72 hours. So that's why we recommend constantly cleaning those surfaces that have come in contact with anybody that was positive or supposedly positive. So cleaning it with soap and water, or and antiseptic wipes is recommended.
Okay. Dr. Idrees bhai, there's a question that sorry. There are a couple of questions from more the buzurgo elderly that, you know, they are 75, 85 years old. They have a lot of comorbidities, such as having had bypass surgery. They're brittle diabetics, or they have very high blood pressure and high cholesterol. And they are asking, should they be taking the vaccine?
So the answer is yes. They are the patients. They are the people who have to take the vaccine. These are the most vulnerable people in the society, are those who are high-risk populations and those who are going to get severe disease, and those who are more likely to get hospitalized, and those who are more likely to khuda na khwasta maut waqe thi sake chhe. So elderly people, elderly Mumineen with comorbidities are the main patients or main people who should definitely take the vaccine.
Thank you. Dr. Salma bhen, if you've had COVID, after you recover from COVID, when is it safe to take your first shot of the vaccine?
The CDC recommends you can wait up till 3 months to get your vaccine. But if you, especially if you got monoclonal antibodies infusion, ya tamare Regeneron, ya tamare medicines lageli che, to wait at least 3 months. Otherwise, you can get it as soon as you are feeling better and completely recovered from COVID.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Idrees bhai, now a lot of these are, some of these questions are regarding medications. Are there any medications that would contraindicate to taking the vaccine?
There is no known medication that is a contraindication to taking the vaccine.
Okay. There's also a theory that one should take Tylenol after getting the vaccine to avoid reactions. But is that true?
It would depend upon the severity of their side effect. For the most part, the first shot is not as significant in terms of developing side effects, but the second shot can cause body aches, low-grade fever, chills. To relieve those, if you can power through that, alhamdulillah, just power through it. But if it is too much to handle, then taking Tylenol and Motrin is good enough. But you don't have to necessarily take it up front, thinking that something is going to happen. It is better that you know what is happening rather than trying to mask it. But if it becomes too much to handle, then definitely take some Tylenol and Motrin. But I wouldn't recommend taking it before anything happens.
Salma bhen, Dr. Salma bhen, there's a question regarding the timing of the shots. And if I'm not able to get the second shot at the appropriate time of 3 to 4 weeks, given whichever vaccine I get, is it okay if that second shot is delayed?
Yes, it will be okay. Vaccine shipment now per depend kare che kani bar, and it's gonna be all right if instead of 3 or 4 weeks you're getting it in 5 or 6 weeks. It's still okay.
Okay, shukran. एक क्वेश्चन છે ડોક્ટર સલમાબેન કે એમ સુનું છે કે આ વેક્સિનનું એક સાઇડ ઇફેક્ટ ઇન્ફર્ટિલિટી છે. આ સહી છે?
No, it's not. It's more rumors than anything scientifically proven.
અને हमारे if we are trying to have children, એમાં કોઈ તરીકે सी problem થઈ શકે છે because of this vaccine?
No, nothing has been shown that it can be causing a problem or anything like that.
Okay. Dr. Salma Ben, જે પહેલું શોટ છે વેક્સિનનું અને જે બીજું શોટ છે એ બે શોટ એક્ઝેક્ટલી સેમ ડોઝ છે કે અલગ ડોસીસ છે વેક્સિનના?
Exactly same dose છે.
Okay, shukran. एक question છે Dr. Idrees bhai કે do I need to pay to get the COVID-19 vaccine?
No, the COVID-19 vaccine is free for all Americans.
Okay. So, Dr. Idrees bhai, एक question છે actually Dr. Salma Ben કે when will I know when it's my turn to get the COVID-19 vaccine?
Like we discussed in the slides, જે તમારા phase ના હિસાબ से. So whatever phase you are in, if you're a healthcare worker છો या આપના પાસે risk factors છે, the risk factors that Dr. Idrees bhai talked about, diabetic છો, cancer patient છો, heart disease છે, તો એના હિસાબથી તમને you have to follow those guidelines from CDC અને તમારા પોતાના જે કાઉન્ટીના health departmentની વેબસાઇટ પર જઈને આપ પતા કરી શકો છો કે which category you are into.
Okay. Dr. Idrees bhai, so how, if you do have an allergic reaction to the vaccine, किवारे खबर पड़े तरत के delayed fashion से?
So it is expected that any allergic reaction will happen quite early, within minutes to the first hour or so. The longer the time passes, the chances of developing a significant adverse reaction or a significant allergic reaction becomes less. So in our vaste, usually 15 minute no after taking the vaccine, 15 minute no waiting period hoy che. જે જગા પર તમે વેક્સિન લાવ છો એ લોકો વહાં તમને 15 મિનિટ રાખશે, મોનિટર કરશે ને એના બાદ તમે then you are able to leave. So, and if anything were to happen, it will happen within minutes or within the hour.
Dr. Idrees bhai, infection baad, after coming out of quarantine, kitla divas pachi negative test hoy COVID nu?
So that varies. Essentially, if you have, CDC doesn't recommend that you necessarily need to retest it to make sure you're negative. If you are seeing symptoms 10 days out and no fever, you could break your quarantine. However, it has been seen that some people remain positive on their test and એમાં પછી ફિકર એમ થઈ જાય છે કે મેં હજી બી contagious છું કે નહીં. તો એમાં symptoms ના ઉપર again પાછું ઘણું બેસ્ટ છે કે symptoms અગર નથી તો you are good and 10 days have passed, you are good. But positive test એના વાસ્તે હોય છે કે sometimes virusના fragments test એટલું sensitive હોય છે કે sometimes the virusના fragment જે તમારા પાછળ રહ્યા હોય નાકના પાછળ या ગલાના અંદર એ પકડાઈ જાય છે તો એના વજહથી test positive થઈ જાય છે. So it is not necessarily considered to be active infection if you have no symptoms and 10 days have passed.
Dr. Salma Ben, apne vaccination લઈ લીધું હોય પછી apne mask પહેરવાની, social distance કરવાની શું કામ જરૂરત છે?
કેમ કે ભાઈ nothing is 100%. Even the vaccines are 95% effective. So even that 5% effectiveness જે નથી એના વાસ્તે protect કરવા વાસ્તે એના સજી ઘણું જરૂરી છે અને હજી more and more population है जारे Idrees भाई बात करी herd immunity जारे develop થઈ જશે इंशाल्लाह अगर 80% of the people will take the vaccine तो પછી at that time we can think about removing our mask, but for the time being mask and social distancing is still on.
If we can just take a pause here, and if Dr. Manasawala can check on our next speaker, and I can continue with questions. Dr. Salma, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ben.
Okay. So one of the questions is, agar mane infection thai, ane recovery pachi me kitlo wakat waste non-infectious rahi saku chu?
I don't know what exactly they mean. As Dr. Idrees bhai said, 10 days hoy che tamara infection na, and after that if you're feeling good, you don't need a retest again. Tamari natural immunity tamatan 3 months tak aji tak kevai che ke 3 months tak you are immune from that infection. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay. Dr. Idrees bhai, ghana questions aaya che ke a lot of people have family in India and elsewhere in the South Asian subcontinent. Is there any comment on the Chinese vaccine that you could help with?
So that's a very good point. So number one, China ni je bay vaccine che Sinopharm, which is being considered to be the one that is actively being given out in India as well as in Pakistan. Efficacy rate is between 65% to about 79%. At this point, all the vaccines that have been approved, none of the patients in the trials have died. None of the patients in the trials have developed severe disease as far as the literature has shown. So from an efficacy standpoint, it is okay to go ahead and take the vaccine. I say that with a little bit of grain of salt that we do not have exact details on the Chinese vaccine in terms of safety and efficacy, but we haven't heard anything big about it or anything majorly wrong with it. But bottom line is this, that any vaccine at this point which has been approved is better than not taking it and being exposed to the risk of developing bad disease from COVID.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Idrees bhai, another question is for patients who are on ACE inhibitors, any contraindication for not taking the vaccine?
No, that is no longer a acceptable concern. It was an initial myth that it led to higher risk of infections in patients who are taking ACE inhibitors because coronavirus it uses the ACE receptor on the cell to get in. But that has been debunked by now, and as far as vaccines are concerned, there is no concern whatsoever.
Okay, Dr. Salma bhen, are there any probiotics or other supplements that could be used to prevent COVID?
Not really probiotics, but we do recommend vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D sort of supplements to build up your immunity on a general basis, but otherwise there's nothing proven that really helps to prevent.
Okay.
Alifia, if I can say something about another topic.
Go ahead.
I just wanted Mumineen audience I just wanted to bring the awareness that COVID na variants shuru thai gaya chhe sagla ye notice kidu hase je UK no variant છે ને સાઉથ આફ્રિકા નો વેરિયન્ટ છે એ બારામાં પ્લીઝ આપ સગલા એને ધ્યાનમાં રાખે. This variants are considered to be more contagious. They are more easily transmissible. Thankfully, there is no report that it causes any more severe disease than others than the primary variant, the primary virus. but it definitely is more contagious. So so what is the main, and as far as Pfizer and Moderna is concerned, it also is shown that it is potentially is protective against that as well. So it is that much more important to take the vaccine now that new variants which are more contagious and more easily transmissible are out there. And in addition to that, I want to really, really emphasize the point of mask wearing. Amnaj aap log notice kido se there was a report that double mask wearing is now considered to be 92% effective. It is definitely extremely highly suggested, recommended that mask wearing should not be considered, should be considered anytime you leave the house. So please, a vaccine, emna samajho ke a vaccine le lidu tave I'm in the clear. You have to wear your mask and you have to social distance. Shukran.
Excellent. That was a repeated question. Also, either Salma bhen or Idrees bhai, if one of you can comment on the pediatric population with respect to the vaccination.
There is no pediatric vaccine yet that has been approved. They are working on vaccines trials for between 12 and 16 years of age, but they have not been approved yet. So, bachcha ne thodi var joi parsa.
Hello? 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 Hello, can I present, Hatim bhai?
Yes, Munira ben, we can hear you.
Can I show my first slide? Can I present, Hatim bhai?
Yes, please, Munira ben, go ahead. Everybody can hear you loud and clear. Shukran.
So it is my unique pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Hotez. Dr. Peter is the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at the Baylor College of Medicine. He has many, many very prestigious appointments, including an appointment at the Texas Children's Hospital. He's an endowed chair, a university professor, a faculty fellow, and many, many other honors. Dr. Hotez did his undergraduate university education at the Yale University and obtained his MD and PhD from Weill Cornell Medical College and Rockefeller. And most importantly, Dr. Hotez is an internationally reputable vaccine scientist. He has done seminal work in the prevention and treatment of neglected tropical diseases. Most importantly, during the current pandemic, he has played a very leading role in the coronavirus infection. He is heading a Texas children COVID-19 vaccine trial in India. His scientific accomplishments can hardly be understated. He has about 550 scientific publications, peer-reviewed. He has written 4 single-author books on vaccines, and he is a member of many prestigious academies recognized by scientists. He's the founding editor-in-chief of PLOS Neglected Tropical Diseases. He has worked a lot with India and the Indian government in controlling diseases. He also appears on major news outlets like CNN and ABC. And most importantly, being a scientist myself, I absolutely love hearing him because he is one of our advocates for anti-science movements. So I had recently heard Dr. Hotez give a talk on vaccines at the genetic branch of my National Cancer Institute where I work. at the NIH, and I was totally blown away by his talk. And Dr. Hotez, I'm very, very grateful to you for coming and joining and spending your valuable time with us. I look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that opportunity. Appreciate it, and it's an honor to be here. And I'll talk for about 30 minutes and then answer some questions and get your thoughts on what I have to say. Shall I don't know if I can share my slides or how you want to work that.
Dr. Hotez, your slides are being shown right now to the audience. You can just say next slide if you feel that's a better way.
Okay, but I cannot see my slides.
So Dr. Hotez, on the top next to the video bridge, you are going to see a tab called Slides. You see slides next to video bridge?
Do not. Let's see. Presenter chats.
Right on the top where it says Go to Webcast, right below Go to Webcast, there are 3 tabs: Video Bridge, Slides, and Overlay Videos.
No, not on mine. Let me.
Or you can continue presenting your slides at your end locally, and then I'll present it over here as you speak.
Okay, I guess I'll do that. Let me see, unless I can. Just see if I do this here. No. Okay, well, let me see if I can do that then. All right, well, I'll just each time I see the slide, I'll mention it. All right, should we do it that way?
Sure. Just let me know next slide, and I will start the slides forward.
So the title slide says "Preventing the Next Pandemic: Vaccine Diplomacy in the Time of Anti-Science." This is actually the title of my new book that was just released this month, and it basically makes the case that while COVID-19 has been a terrible event for the world. In fact, it's a culminating event for a pretty systematic unraveling that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. Slide number 2 is the fact that we have seen enormous progress in reducing the burden of severe disease, especially among children under the age of 5. And this has come about through the Global Alliance of Vaccines and Immunization, the Gavi Alliance, that was launched by the Gates Foundation with $750 million. And the alliance brings in the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the World Bank, and the pharmaceutical companies and academic partners in order to expand the use of existing vaccines. And you can see that we've made tremendous progress with an 87% decline in the number of kids dying from measles and similar gains in whooping cough and tetanus and diphtheria and meningitis. And so that's great news for the world of the progress over the last 20 years. But in certain areas of in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and even the United States, we've seen an unraveling of this. And this, in slide 3, this is the title of the book, Preventing the Next Pandemic, Vaccine Diplomacy in a Time of Anti-Science. And I think one of the messages of the book and this lecture is the fact that if you look on the left at the list of things that are causing the unraveling, they're not topics that we typically think about as physicians or as physician scientists or scientists in the biomedical science and the biomedical sciences. It's things like poverty and war and political instability and urbanization, deforestation, and climate change and anti-science that are combining in unique and interesting ways and bringing about this abrupt rise in vaccine-preventable diseases. And that's something I think was a wake-up call for many of us, is that we have to start broadening our education, beginning to think about these kinds of big social forces, and in the case of climate change, or earth science changes that we ordinarily are not trained to think about. So on slide number 4, as an example, these are some of the hotspot areas where we are seeing how political instability combines with climate change and urbanization, deforestation, anti-science to bring back disease. And it's happening, for instance, on the Arabian Peninsula, where we've seen abrupt rises in temperatures to 50 degrees Celsius, drying up ancient agricultural lands along the Tigris and Euphrates, causing people to flee ancient agricultural pursuits in urban areas, but that's exacerbated now by political instability and that aggressive urbanization. And of course, this led to terrible conflicts in Iraq and Syria and then Yemen. And the point is, it's this perfect storm, this combination of forces that's driving back disease. Or what Jeffrey Gettleman of the New York Times calls Africa's unwars, they're not really wars in the conventional sense between armed factions, but in fact predatory banditry of our militias on civilian populations. And this is bringing back disease and collapsing health systems in places like the Boko Haram area of northern Nigeria, or in Chad, or in Central African Republic, in Central Latin America. In Venezuela, with the Maduro regime, we've seen a collapse in infrastructure. And this, too, is bringing back the return of measles. We've seen now, with high unemployment, people working in the malaria mines that are sleeping outside, without the benefit of bed nets. And this is driving mosquito-borne disease. And even where I work and live in Texas on the Gulf Coast, we've seen not so much political instability, but climate change, urbanization, and anti-science forces. So this is really concerning, how we are now seeing a slowing, a halting, a reversal of these gains. And even with COVID-19 now, that's caused over 100 million cases, more than 2 million deaths. And the next slide, number 5, and what you see is that they're occurring also in pretty interesting places. If you look at the countries that are the darkest colors, these are actually wealthy countries in a sense. They're members of the G20, the group of 20 nations, the 20 economies that comprise 85% of the world's economy. So it's not only in these fragile nation states where these diseases are occurring, but in fact, in wealthy economies, but particularly it's low-income neighborhoods in these wealthy economies. It's the poor living among the wealthy that are accounting for a big return of disease. And this is a new concept in global health. You know, when we talk about global health, we talk about the rich versus the poor, or wealthy nations versus poor nations, or global north versus the global south. And I've been looking at these trends now for a few years and actually finding that what we're actually seeing is diseases such as leishmaniasis or Chagas disease or tuberculosis or dengue are actually occurring predominantly in the G20 nations, but it's the poor living among those G20 nations. I sometimes call them the poorest of the rich. And this is a concept that's not widely accepted yet, but one I think that'll prove to be very important. And I give it a different name for global health. I call it blue marble health, to remark on the fact that rather than the usual norms of global health, poor versus wealthy, it's the poor living among the wealthy that account for this. And this very much goes along with the COVID-19 playbook. Now, in terms of developing vaccines for COVID-19, almost all of the vaccines that we have for this disease focus on the spike protein of the virus, and by now everyone has seen cartoons of the spike of the coronavirus, SARS-2 coronavirus that causes COVID-19. This is an actual transmission. A cryo-EM picture, I believe. You can actually see the spikes emanating out of the surface of the coronavirus. These are these trimeric spikes, and this is what allows it to bind to the host receptor. And they all of the vaccines work by inducing high levels of virus neutralizing antibody to the spike protein together with T cell help. And on the left, there's a slide from Dr. Anthony Fauci, one of my mentors who heads the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And what he's showing is that there's a wide range of different technologies you can use to apply to developing spike protein vaccines, whether it's recombinant proteins or nanoparticles or RNA or DNA vaccines or adenovirus vaccines or live attenuated vaccines. And that includes our recombinant protein vaccine that we're developing at Baylor. But they're all more or less working by inducing high levels of virus neutralizing antibody together with host T cell responses. And the goals of these vaccines is to reduce symptomatic infection, to prevent hospitalizations, ICU admissions, and ultimately death. But the other performance feature of these vaccines is I think they do also stop asymptomatic infection and virus shedding from the nose, mouth, and the throat. And we showed this in non-human primates with our vaccines, as has the others. So we don't still have this completely pinned down yet, but I think this is probably the case. And then in which case, if we get high vaccine coverage, we can potentially also interrupt transmission of the virus. And that's very exciting because that will really help us get life back to normal. But for this to happen, to get to 60 to 80, 90% coverage, we're going to need several vaccines, not just the mRNA vaccines. I think we'll have to vaccinate children. And we're going to have to step up our level of public communication around these vaccines. This is slide number 7. If we go to slide number 8, I'm showing you the different waves of our U.S. public-private partnership between the pharma companies and the U.S. government, known as Operation Warp Speed. And the first wave of those vaccines began last year when 2 mRNA vaccines were released, Moderna and Pfizer. And now we're starting to see the beginnings of a second wave of vaccine for the first 2 quarters of 2021. This will be the AstraZeneca vaccine from which is an adenovirus platform vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, an adenovirus. Novavax is a protein particle vaccine. And then the hope is that a third wave of vaccines will come along towards the middle of this year, and that's our biological E vaccine produced in Hyderabad in India with Baylor College of Medicine. And then the question I'm often asked is, hey, doc, which one are you going to take? And I basically say, look, I would have taken the first vaccine made available to me, and I happen to, this is slide number 9, and this is, and that's exactly what I did. I was offered the Pfizer vaccine. I took it, but I would have taken the Moderna or the AstraZeneca vaccine because they all work by inducing virus neutralizing antibodies. We don't know the durability of the protection for any of these vaccines, but I say that's okay because potentially later on we'll get a boost with a third dose of these vaccines, either the same or a different one. So whichever one you have access to, take it, and you can then potentially get boosted later on. Slide number 10, in terms of the side effects for these vaccines, so far with the mRNA vaccines, they seem to elicit fever and headache and fatigue and myalgias. Some say it's worse than the second dose than the first dose. We have seen severe allergic reactions, but despite what you're hearing, they're still relatively uncommon. The newest is about 3 to 6 per million for the mRNA vaccines, which is higher, about 3 times higher than it is the severe allergic reactions for the flu and HPV vaccines. And that came out of studies on the right here where I did an analysis for the New York Times called you were unvaccinated and got sick, these are your odds. And it compares the risks of getting the vaccine versus the disease for HPV that causes cervical cancer, flu, or MMR that prevents measles. And some people find it helpful as a graphic way to illustrate risk. So it is higher in terms of severe allergic reaction, but it's still a very rare phenomenon. So that it would still be a very minus little tiny dot on the boxes on the right. We are also seeing rare cases of thrombocytopenia and facial palsy, which may or may not be related to the vaccine. The thrombocytopenia is not that uncommon. We've seen this with the MMR vaccine, but we see it also with measles. So there's some question whether the virus itself can also be responsible for this. Slide number 11. Now we have the new additional problem that we're seeing these 501 variants that are emerging, and these are concerning because they seem to be spreading at a faster rate than the original parent SARS coronavirus type 2. And this has really taken off in South Africa, for instance. So the South African variant occupies about 95% of the virus variants. And when they pop up, they tend to outcompete the other virus strains very rapidly. So we saw this in England as well, where the UK variant appeared in September for the first time, and by November it occupied about half the variants in the Southeast. Unfortunately, now these variants are here in the United States, especially the UK variant, and that's spreading rapidly. So my prediction is that by the middle of March, end of March, early May, this will be the dominant variant in the US. They really spread very rapidly. And that makes me concerned because we have seen declines in the amount of COVID-19 in the last few weeks in the United States. Now I think we can expect to see a big uptick. The way these variants seem to work, in the UK variant, what happens is you see that, on slide number 12, what you see is in yellow or gold there where it says N501Y. This is a mutation producing a tyrosine, and it occurs on the 3 spike protein receptor binding domains. So the way the spike protein works, it's a trimer, and it has each of the subunits has its own receptor binding domain, but only one of them flips up to interact with the receptor. And in this case, when you have that mutation to a tyrosine, what happens is it appears to cause tighter binding, and that may be responsible for increased transmission. With the South African variant, you have that same 501Y mutation, but in addition, you have a second mutation where glutamic acid is shifted in the amino acid 484 position, has switched to lysine. And the reason that's significant is with the UK variant, that one mutation is not affecting the effectiveness of all of our vaccines. However, with the South African variant, that E to 484K mutation is affecting the efficacy of vaccines, and the efficacy for the South African variant is going down. So on slide 13, this is where we're at right now with the US, where you can see that the green is where the UK variant is, the orange, red is in the South African variant in South Carolina. Now it's in Houston as well, and then the yellow is where the Brazil variant has occurred. And then the question is, well, okay, Dr. Hotez, if you have all 3 now, which one is going to outbeat the others? And the thinking currently, when I spoke to Trevor Bedford, who's a molecular evolutionary virologist who thinks about this, he feels that the UK variant is likely the one to become dominant. So the good news on slide 13, if you go back to 12 again, is that at least for now, the UK variant will not affect vaccine development, but if the South African one begins to take off later on in the year, that may be a problem. So that was slide 13. Now going to 14 is the efficacies and strategies. So all of the vaccines, I'm listing in the first bullet for each of the vaccines, their efficacy against either the original strain or what's likely to be the UK strain. and the second bullet is for ZA, which means the South African strain. So you can see that it is decreased efficacy, and I think a lot of it has to do, in terms of whether it'll still protect against the South African variant, is its ability to induce high levels of virus neutralizing antibody to begin with. So even if there's a decrease in the amount of virus neutralizing antibody, it's still enough to give you significant levels of protection. So the only one in this list that does not seem to be very strong against the South African variant is the bottom one, is the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. And I think that has to do with the fact that the initial levels of virus neutralizing antibody is not high to begin with. And so then therefore, when you have decreased virus neutralizing antibody, it puts it below the threshold. So now for all of us as vaccine developers, we're looking to make a decision about whether to develop a brand new bivalent vaccine or an option one, or I think more likely it's going to be proceeding with the original vaccine and developing a boost versus the ZA versus the South African one. Going to the next slide, on slide 15. So where does this leave us with low and middle income countries in Latin America, India, Africa? I'm concerned about the big urban areas where it's difficult to actually conduct social distancing. And if we go to next slide 16, it turns out we don't really have a lot of vaccines available for low and middle income countries, at least ones that meet stringent requirements. So on the left are the global health COVID-19 vaccine stringent requirements. You may say, well, how come I don't have the 2 mRNA vaccines on there? Well, they do meet stringent requirements, but we just don't have enough. It's the production methods are such that it's really hard to make enough for low and middle income countries, so they're not going to filter to the LMICs. So what do we have? We have the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, which is now being produced by Serum Institute of India and Pune, which I think is going to be a great vaccine for the original and the UK variants, but will not likely work for the South African one. We have the J&J one, which is another adenovirus vaccine. You have our biological E-Baylor vaccine, based in Hyderabad, another Hyderabad company, and Bharat Biotech is making an inactivated virus vaccine. And on the right, you have the Russian and Chinese vaccines that currently are not meeting WHO pre-qualification standards. And one of the concerns I have is they seem to be working, in some cases, okay against the original variant, probably the UK, but given their low virus neutralizing antibodies, I believe that many of them will not work against the South African variant, like the Russian, like the Sinovac, like the CanSino Bio vaccine. Next slide, which is slide 17, shows the partner of our recombinant protein COVID vaccine for global health that we developed at Texas Children's Hospital and Baylor College of Medicine. And we work with an organization known as PATH, which is a nonprofit based in Seattle that does a lot of work with the Gates Foundation to develop global health vaccines like the malaria vaccine for Africa, the meningococcal vaccine for Africa. And they're helping us organize our partnership with Biological E, based in Hyderabad. And our vaccine, slide 18, also uses the receptor binding domain, and we find that it induces high levels of virus neutralizing antibody without any kind of eosinophilic immune enhancement that sometimes plagues the full spike protein or the inactivated virus. On slide 19, our vaccine is expressed in yeast through yeast fermentation, and it uses Pichia pastoris as the yeast strain. You might say, well, why is that important? Well, it's interesting because that yeast, or one similar to it, like Hensenula, is the same one that is used to make the hepatitis B vaccine locally in Bangladesh, Brazil, Cuba, India, and Indonesia. And now we've done this with SARS-1 vaccine. Now we're scaling it up for the SARS-2 vaccine with plans to make 1.2 billion doses now in 2021. In slide 20, these are some of the cloning and expression strategies. So we do things to the molecule, like don't express the N-terminal amino acid asparagine because it causes excessive glycosylation. So we can get rid of that. And then on the right, we can do site-directed immunogenesis to get rid of a free cysteine to prevent intermolecular disulfide bonds. On slide 21 is a summary of our major milestones. As I said, we're working with Biological E for scale-up production. This is a recombinant protein that uses the receptor binding domain of the SARS-2 spike protein expressed in yeast. And we formulated on alum, which is one of the oldest adjuvants we have, together with the CpG oligonucleotide from Dynavax. And our production cell bank was developed at our labs at Texas Children's Hospital that we have licensed not exclusively to BioE. And this vaccine induces high levels of virus neutralizing antibody in mice and non-human primates and protective immunity. And we're quite excited about it. Now, also on slide 22, some of the advantages of our molecule is its ease of production and scalability, 1.2 billion doses. It requires a simple refrigeration, and the technology's been around for 40 years, so it builds on 40 years of a track record because the same technology used to make the recombinant hepatitis B vaccine that's used globally, so it's potentially suitable for children and infants, and I think it could have widespread vaccine acceptance. It's also very inexpensive. We estimate only $1.50 a dose, so we think it'll be the least expensive of all of the COVID-19 vaccines. Slide 23, just to finish up, I'll say the other major activity I'm involved with is, as was mentioned before, is counteracting anti-science, anti-vaccine groups. And I really got into this in a big way when I wrote this book, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism. I have 4 adult kids, including Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disabilities. And the reason I wrote it was because we had a rising anti-science movement here in Texas starting around 2015. And I felt it was necessary to begin countering some of those activities. So I began writing books and speaking out, going up against anti-science movement, which is not easy. So that's slide 23. Go to slide 24. This has now reached a point where in 2019, the World Health Organization declared vaccine hesitancy one of the top 10 global health threats. It led to more than 80,000 measles cases in Europe in 2018, 90,000 in 2019. In slide 25, now it's reached the U.S. In a very big way. So in slide 26, this is kind of a summary of what the anti-vaccine movement is like. And I like to make the case that, the anti-vaccines, anti-science groups keep moving the goalposts on this. At first on the left, they said it was caused by, the vaccines caused autism, and they went through this whole list of first MMR vaccine and thimerosal. Then it was spacing the vaccines, and then it was alum, and now they've shifted to health freedom, and medical freedom is the reason for not vaccinating. And then they began targeting specific vaccines like the HPV vaccine, making claims that it caused autoimmunity, infertility, and chronic illness. And so, for example, in Texas now, we've got more than 72,000 kids denied access to their vaccinations. And this has created a real crisis because now, our pediatric cohort is vulnerable to measles and other childhood diseases. And this is slide 27 now. It's become a big problem to the point where the return of childhood disease is going to be fairly common in 28. And then what's happened is this has led to these health freedom protests where they're not only rallying against vaccines, but also masks and social distance contact tracing. So it really has become a full-on science movement. On slide 29, now we're starting to see this convergence of the anti-science movement, anti-vaccine movement, and campaigns against COVID-19 vaccines, where they claim these vaccines are rushed, adequately tested for safety, but also that the mRNA vaccines are causing all those things on the right, none of which are true. And you can see the top ones, infertility, autoimmunity, are what they claim for the HPV vaccine. So they just copied from that onto COVID-19. The next to the last slide, this movement is now globalized. This anti-science movement is no longer just in Texas and Oklahoma. It's not only is it national, but now we've seen anti-mask, anti-vaccine rallies in Berlin, Germany, and in London, and in Paris. And we're even seeing now involvement of the Russian government that's flooding our internet with this program of weaponized health communication. So it's become this full-on globalized anti-science movement. And on the last slide, I'll just say, we're involved in this epic struggle, trying to vaccinate the world, but being opposed by all of these very dangerous 21st century forces that, again, we're only really beginning to understand as physicians and scientists of how to prevent it. So I'll stop there and see what people are thinking, and happy to questions.
Dr. Hotez, this is Dr. Mohammed Manasawala. Really want to thank you for that wonderful and informative presentation. We do have some questions that have been filtering in from the audience that I wanted to get your thoughts on. One of the questions was regarding, there are a lot of questions regarding children being vaccinated, and I know that you're working on vaccines at Texas Children's for this. Do you have any sense of a timeline where the research, where the phase trials are right now, and at what point we should expect our children maybe in line for a vaccination? Will it be in 2021 or later? And how do you think that, in conjunction with how that affects them going to school?
Yeah, I think the pediatric vaccines, I'm hoping the first ones might be out by this fall, so in time for the fall school semester. That would be a pretty high bar, but that's what the aspiration is for us and our recombinant protein vaccine, as well as for the mRNA vaccine. So they're just now undergoing clinical testing in kids. So the hope is that we may have some answers fairly soon. One of the things I am worried about is parental acceptance of the mRNA vaccine, since we have a pretty high vaccine hesitancy anyway, even for adults. So that may be an issue, and that might be an advantage of bringing in our recombinant protein vaccine, because the technology's been around for 40 years. Parents have already vaccinated their kids against hepatitis B with it. There might be a higher level of comfort. So I'm hoping vaccines might be available for the fall. I think in terms of opening schools, the most critical component is vaccinating the teachers and staff to give them a comfort level to come into work. I think that has been a barrier so far, and I'm hoping that we can accelerate our ability to vaccinate teachers.
Thank you. We have a question on, I was only able to get one dose, and then the place where that I got the dose, I wasn't able to get the second dose. And what is the level of protection from only one dose, and how long can it be before I can get the second dose to still be an effective second dose?
Yeah, the reason you get two doses of the vaccines is because the studies had shown that when you get two doses, it brings everybody up to a very high level of virus neutralizing antibody and protection. The problem with a single dose is that some people do have virus neutralizing antibodies, but others are not responders. So you need that second dose to make everybody a responder. So I think, while you sometimes hear a single dose is partially protective, I think what it really is some people are protected, some people are not protected at all, and it kind of amortizes to call it partially protective. So basically, if you just have a single dose of your vaccine, you have to operate as though you've not been vaccinated in terms of risk. And in terms of when you can get the second dose, there's not a lot of data about delaying it. I think a week or two probably doesn't make that much difference. But when you start getting weeks and weeks out, I think there's no data to know one way or the other. It'll probably still work, but obviously it's better to stick to the schedule that we know about.
And if you get the second dose early, is that an issue, like a week early or something like that?
A week early might be a bit soon. If it's just a couple of days difference, that should be okay. But try not to push it too much in terms of the short spacing between doses. If anything, longer is better.
Thank you. There's also some talk and questions about mixing and matching the vaccines, that people have heard things that it may be more protective to have one of one and another of the other. Is this something that's true?
I'd say it's something that's possible, but it hasn't been studied, so there's no data. So for instance, with the AstraZeneca vaccine that does not protect against the South African variant, people have gotten 2 doses. If they got a boost with a 3rd dose of our vaccine for the South African variant, would that also protect? Would there be a boosting effect and protect against the South African variant? I think it's an interesting idea. I think it might work, but we have to test it. So, and then I hear about individuals who may have gotten Moderna as the first dose, but they can't get Moderna for the 2nd dose. Can they get the Pfizer for the 2nd? And the answer is possibly. That it might work, but it hasn't been studied. So it introduces risk in the sense that I don't think it's going to be a huge safety issue, but I think it could be an issue of how effective it'll be in terms of inducing virus neutralizing antibodies and protection. We just don't know.
Thank you. There's a question regarding the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the efficacy for severe disease being around 72% versus the Moderna and Pfizer being 95%. And the question is, if I don't have a choice and I'm offered the J&J vaccine, should I hold out and wait to be offered the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, or should I go ahead and take the J&J vaccine?
I would take the J&J vaccine. Remember also that the J&J vaccine is being studied in 2 doses as well. So I think the second dose could be forthcoming for the J&J. And I think the 2-dose J&J vaccine might be better than the 2-dose Moderna and Pfizer vaccine. To me, the single-dose J&J vaccine looks better than the single-dose Moderna or Pfizer vaccine. But remember, you're doing it in a single dose. And the recommendation might be to go ahead and boost with 2 doses later on.
Okay, thank you. Where do you see, now that we have these brand new mRNA vaccines, where do you see vaccine development going from here? I mean, some of these new vaccines, there is still an adenovirus vaccine, but do you see more and more mRNA vaccines being produced in the future now with this type of speed of trials? Or do you see this as a one-time wonder type of a thing here?
Well, I think we'll see more and more of this technology. It certainly opens the door to a lot of possibilities. I also think the technology will be refined and improved upon, right? So we'll have it so that it won't be as fussy in terms of freezer requirements. So hopefully they can refine the stability, make innovation. So maybe you can even keep it at room temperature at some point. Maybe it can be refined to be less reactogenic, meaning it doesn't give you as much in the way of side effects like fever and headache and fatigue and muscle aches. So I think you will see improvements. But I also think it's going to be important to keep the old school technologies around because, it's still a new technology. We don't know its long-term effects and or durability of protection. So I think it's going to be important not to rush completely over to the mRNA side, and we're going to have to keep both in play for a while.
Understood. Thank you. Most of the audience here, is used to traveling back and forth to Southeast Asia frequently, and a lot of the questions are, once I'm vaccinated, how safe is it for me to travel, specifically to India, Pakistan, but also just overall in the world, given the differences in vaccine distribution everywhere? If I'm vaccinated, how safe am I to travel?
Well, it really depends on which vaccine you've gotten and its level of protective efficacy. And if you're traveling to a part of the world where there's a variant that is predominant that may not protect as well. So for instance, if you were to get the AstraZeneca vaccine and travel to South Africa, I would say you're still quite vulnerable to illness. If you get the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, and you're going to a place where the South African variant is not widespread, you can be pretty confident that you're not going to become severely ill with COVID-19 or go to the hospital. So yeah, this will allow you to do some air travel. So, but you're going to have some situational awareness of which vaccine that you got and knowing the landscape of where you're going.
Dr. Hotez.
I'll give you an example. So my wife and I now have been vaccinated. We haven't seen our adult kids in over a year, and two of our adult kids, my oldest daughter teaches at UCLA, and my oldest son who's in Tucson, Arizona. So they're going to see them for the first time in over a year in March because we feel comfortable traveling now because we're vaccinated. Also, there is this issue of the new variants coming up. So now the numbers are going down. So if we also think if we're going to travel, this might be a better time to do it before the variants really rev up as well in a bigger way.
Dr. Hotez, your knowledge and your expertise in the realm of vaccines is unsurpassed. And the SBMAA sincerely thanks you for sharing your vast experience with us today. We're very appreciative that you took your time out of your extremely busy schedule to sit down with us today. And it's really been our honor and our pleasure to have you speak at this COVID-19 vaccine webinar. So on behalf of the Saifi Burhani Medical Association America, we wish you continued success in your mission to battle misinformation and to educate the public on the benefits of the COVID-19 vaccine and to encourage vaccination. And we appreciate you encouraging our community to get vaccinated. We also wish you success in your ongoing endeavor to develop a COVID vaccine for children. We really look forward to that day for our children. We thank you once again for accepting our invitation and sharing your expertise in this webinar. And we really hope that you had a positive experience today and that you'd consider joining us again in the future. We wish you have a very wonderful President's Day weekend.
Thank you very much, and all the best to everyone and your families. And this is a terrible time, and hopefully things will start looking up for us by the fall. But things will change, and if necessary, and things there's a lot of changes going on. Always happy to come back and talk again about this issue. But wishing you all the very best.
We would absolutely appreciate that and look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
So first and foremost, I would like to do Sajadat al-Shukur in Hazrat Aliyah for the Hidayat and the Dua Mubarak Aqa Mola Tawalla Umrul Sharif ila Yawmuddin has bestowed upon us, especially during this Wabano time. The SBMAA no Shukur Guzar che Janab Mukerram bhaisaheb no for his support and guidance throughout our seminar, webinar, no planning process. Hame shukur guzar che for our speakers, Dr. Peter Hotez, Dr. Sheikh Idrees Bhai Mogri, and Dr. Salma bin Saiger, कि अपनु invitation आप सगले accept कीदू, आज आया अने अपनु expertise हमारा साथ share कीदू. हमें शुक्र गुजार छे Dr. Munira bin Basraino for her instrumental role in securing Dr. Hotez as a speaker today. I'd like to personally thank the entire SBMAA Board of Directors and Administrators for all of their efforts in planning of this webinar. Jazakallah khair. We'd like to thank Sagla Mumineen no Shukur Guzar she, કે આપ સગલા મુમિનીન મુમિનાત હાજર થયા આપના બિઝી સ્કેડ્યુલ્સમાંથી ટાઈમ લઈને આ વેબિનારમાં શામિલ થયા ઉમ્મીદ છે કે સગલાને જ્યાદાથી જ્યાદા ફાયદો પહોંચ્યો હોય आखिर में खुदा ताला हमारा किबलेगार आका मौला सैयदना व मौलाना आली कदर मुफद्दल सैफुद्दीन ની ઉમર શરીફને તા રોઝે કયામત દરાજ અને દરાજ થાય અને આપના ઠંડા સાયામાં મુમિનીન મુમિનાત અને એના છોટા છોટા ફરજંદો આબાદ વ શાદ રહે આમીન આપનું જે SBMAA નું વેબસાઇટ છે એના ઉપર એક શોર્ટ સર્વે છે જે આપ સગલાને રિક્વેસ્ટ કરીએ છીએ કે ફિલ આઉટ કરે ઇમ્કાન થાય તો. With this, we conclude our webinar. Fi amanillah.